Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so welcome to our Queensborough President's Debate. All of our candidates are here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. As I said, my name is Elaine Young. I'll be moderating the debate. Florence Fisher is the president of the Mid-Queens Community Council, who is the co-sponsor of this event. Now, Florence has had bronchitis for weeks, and she finally decided to listen to what the doctor said and actually stay home. Florence doesn't usually listen to the doctor, but now she realizes that she better do that. So she would have been doing this introduction, but you have me instead. Sorry about that. But we do wish her a speedy recovery. Yes. So it's great to see such a big turnout to come hear the candidates for Queensborough President and to make an informed decision when you vote. And I always tell people that is the most important thing you can do besides voting as a voter is to make sure your decision is informed, whatever it may be, as long as you've learned everything that you can learn. So you're here tonight to find out how everybody stands on various issues. So we are going to also give a hearty thanks to Marilyn Kaufman, who made me have their trying to help get those things going. Okay, but she's the president of the synagogue, the Israel Center for Conservative Judaism. Okay, it's it's okay. I can talk without it. You want me to talk with the mic? Okay. I thought it was pretty loud. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
No?
Yeah.
Close to my mouth. See, that's what I like about it. It's probably good germs. I want to thank Marilyn Kaufman, as I said, the president of the synagogue here, for having us. They're very generous, wonderful hosts for us. And I also want to thank Lois Marbach, who is from our co-sponsoring organization, Progressive Voices United. Special thanks also to the other Mid-Queens Community Council board members who are here. We have Jeff Gottlieb, who organized this entire and of course to Florence, who I said is home recuperating. That works now? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Now I use this one. Don't pull it. Okay. Jeff, you're pulling it. Marilyn just taped that down, but okay. I just want to name our board members. As I said, Jeff Gottlieb, Florence Fisher, who's home recuperating, Denise Winters, who is also our timer for our candidate sponsors, Alan Sherman, who's also bringing around the microphone for your questions, Lucy Berrios, Abe Fuchs, Stan Norwalk, and me. And I'm going to just go through the rules briefly with you so you'll know what our format is. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to introduce themselves and talk about their plans should they be elected as Queensborough president. Then the audience will ask questions. I will call on audience members, and Alan, who I pointed out, who's waving again, will bring the microphone over. He'll hold the microphone for you, and then you can ask your question. Please keep your questions to a one-part question, not double questions. So, you know, if we had the time for everybody to have their questions answered, then we can start all over again. In fairness, though, we'll have one question apiece. And then, where was I now? Okay, so then the candidates, this is the way we will do it. Also, to be fair, we'll start with the end, who is Jimmy Van Bramer. I'll introduce candidates in just a minute. He will answer the question first, and then the person next to him, they'll pass the microphone down. Hopefully we'll have that out here and working. We do, okay. And then for the next question, the next person sitting next to him, who is Jim Quinn, will start, and so on and so forth. Since we have so many candidates and we'll have so many questions, we know it's a short time, but we're going to ask candidates to keep their answers to 2 minutes. Denise will be timing you here, and she also will indicate to you by holding up a piece of paper when you have only 1 minute left, so you'll know. Then, if you don't need the whole 2 minutes, that's fine. You can't give your time to somebody else, though, should you want to. And then, at the close of the debate, each candidate has 2 minutes for closing remarks. So let me just see. Now we're going to introduce the candidates. Now, we did not seat the candidates in alphabetical order. We just did things a little differently and freely. We just let the candidates choose the seats they wanted as they came in. So let me see. It's not in the order that I have it here, but our first candidate on that end of the table is Jimmy Van Bramer, who is a New York City Council member. To his left is Jim Quinn, who was the Assistant District Attorney in the Queens District Attorney's Office. Next to him is Anthony Miranda, right? I can't necessarily see who's there. Who Jeff tells me is a police reform advocate. Then we have Donovan Richards, who is also a council member. Next to him, we have Danniel Maio. Am I pronouncing and then we have Elizabeth Crowley, a former University council member. And finally, Costa, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, all right? Constantinides.
You got it.
So I was practicing that. So now we're ready to get started. So we're going to start down at that end. What? No, they have a microphone on their table. Yeah. So yes, it's working. Okay. So you can begin and give your introduction.
Great.
Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Jimmy Van Bramer, and I am really grateful to be here tonight. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Astoria, Queens, one of 8 children. I am number 5. My mother has 40 grandchildren. 40 grandchildren. And I'm very proud to come from a working union family. So my stepfather was a janitor. He cleaned the junior high school that we went to in Astoria, Queens. And my mother worked at local supermarkets. She was a cashier at Pathmark on Northern Boulevard. I come from a working class family. No one in my family had ever gone to college before I did. And for me, that is actually the story of Queens. How many of you agree that Queens is the best borough of the 5 boroughs in New York? I know that's a cheap applause line, but I do it every time. Now, the reason we think Queens is the best borough is because it's a borough of opportunity, right? A borough where all people can come to this place from many, many different places and find their spot in this city. And I am really, really lucky to have grown up in Queens, in a working class union family, have been able to work myself through St. John's University, and then to be able to start to work as a community organizer. Now, when I went to St. John's University, I realized something very important about myself, which is that I'm a gay man. And I came out of the closet because it was important that I be who I am and not hide from how I was made to be in this world. So I started as an organizer of LGBTQ students at St. John's. And then for 11 years, I was an organizer for the Queens Public Library System. I'm sure many of you know we have the best public library system in the entire country in Queens. And I hope everyone has their library card.
Absolutely.
And so for 11 years, I worked on behalf of the Queens Public Library all over the borough. And really loved all the neighborhoods, all the diversity neighborhoods. I believe in education so very much. I believe in the youth so very much. And then I was lucky enough to get elected to the New York City Council in 2009. For the last 10 years, I've been the chair of the Cultural Affairs and Libraries Committee, and so proud to have led to record funding in the city of New York for our public libraries, for our cultural institutions, record funding for arts and education, parks, quality of life. Those are the things that matter to every single neighborhood, every single person in Queens. And I want to run for borough president because I know that as an organizer, wow, that is a disturbing button. Disturbing alarm. But we need an organizer in Borough Hall to make sure that every single neighborhood is represented equally. I'm a fighter, I take on tough fights, and I win. I want to do that for every single person in this room. Let me be your fighter, let me win for you. Thank you all very much.
Good evening. My name is Jim Quinn. I'm just going to give you a little bit about my background. I was an assistant DA in the Queens DA's office for 42 years. During that time, I served as a deputy chief in the Narcotic Trials Bureau, a deputy chief.
Yes, good. Down.
Good.
Close the mouth.
I was a deputy chief in the Narcotic Trial Bureau. I was a deputy chief in the Homicide Investigations Bureau. I worked in the Appeals Bureau. I tried murder cases. I tried about 30 homicide cases in Queens County. In 1992, when Judge Brown came in, he appointed me an executive assistant district attorney in charge of the trial division, which included probably about 40% of the office. During that time, I supervised approximately 140 assistant DAs, 7 bureaus within the office, and I served as a public servant, serving you, trying to bring crime down in Queens County. And we did that during all that time. Crime from 1992 to 2018 in Queens County went down over 80%. In 1992, there were 340 homicides in Queens County. Last year, there were approximately 70. Stolen cars in 1992, there were 50,000. Last year, there were 1,200. And that's what we did while we were working in the DA's office. But let me give you some of my background. I grew up in the Ravenswood housing projects down in Long Island City. I went through public school down in Long Island City. I went to Brooklyn Tech High School. I worked my way through Columbia College and Fordham Law School. I worked as a cab driver, a mailman, clerk, and a bank guard at various times during that time. When I graduated law school, I went right into the DA's. I went into the DA's office, and I worked there for 42 years. I'm married. I have 4 children. They're all grown. I have 4 grandchildren, all boys. They're prominently featured. 3 of them are prominently featured in my campaign literature because that's one of the few pictures I had. I decided to run for borough president for 2 main reasons. One is that I am adamantly opposed to the closing of Rikers Island and building a jail. Number 2, I'm adamantly opposed to the new bail laws that I felt that the only way that I could have a platform where I could talk about those 2 issues and other issues also, the only way I could really talk about those issues was to run for borough president and make them a function of my campaign. And you'll see, when I go around to these meetings, those 2 issues become prominent because I'm standing here. They wouldn't be as prominent as they are without me standing here and making this an issue during this campaign. This is your only opportunity to really register a vote against Rikers Island and against those bail laws, and to send a message to the state legislature that you want them changed. Not modified, but changed completely. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Anthony Miranda. I'm a retired New York City police sergeant. I was a detective and police officer, did 20 years in the New York City Police Department. I'm married, have 3 boys. I live right here off 169th Street in Fresh Meadows. I was also a chief of police with the Administration of Children's Services before I decided to run for Queensborough president. The motivation for running for Queensborough president was that I kind of, just like you, a family man raising my family in Queens, but there are too many decisions that were being made for political reasons and not for the interests of the community. That's what motivated me to run. These are individuals who have been elected in office, and there was very few independent voices. And today, we have 3 independent candidates that doesn't have a history working in the city council or any other position, but they had over 8 years or 12 years to fix our problems, which effectively we still have serious problems facing our community. Queens is a great borough, but there are serious issues that we're facing right now, and that has to do with both neglect, deliberate or unintentional, is still neglect, and there's still concerns that we have in our community. In order to have our voices heard, I decided to run for Queens Borough President. Again, they introduced me as a police reform advocate. Inside the New York City Police Department, we fought against discrimination, not only internally in the police department, but also in our communities. We fought to make sure that there was equal and fair representation in the ranks of promotion and opportunity to advance ourselves in the different divisions of the police department. Not a popular position to take when you're working inside the agency and then you want to fight against discrimination. But we took that issue on by organizing ourselves as officers, and then we took it by organizing in the community, because when the community started suffering the same discrimination which we face in the police department, we started unifying with the community at large. We fought against discrimination, we fought against the anti-Semitism that goes on. We opened the doors by the lawsuits that we filed to be able to have organizations in the police department that represent all the other ethnic organizations and diversity of the police department. Prior to our lawsuits, they did not exist. As a result of our lawsuits, it opened the door to have that type of representation. When you're looking for the Queens Borough President, you're looking for an advocate and a voice, somebody who has successfully done that work for over 30 years in our community, ensuring that your voice is being heard. That's the record which I come to you today. Not holding a public office, but doing the right thing because it was the need and it was necessary to defend the rights of our community. I look forward to the debate and having your support again, Anthony Miranda, and I'm running for Queens Borough President.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be here this evening. Let me thank the host tonight. I am New York City Council Member Donovan. It has been an honor to now be a representative in the City Council for 6 years. I got my start actually 17 years ago. I was 19 years old, and the unfortunate and untimely murder of my childhood friend Danniel led me to my local city councilman's office. Wanted to do something with my life to ensure that no other young man or woman from my community would be murdered at such a young age, 19 years old. So I pledged after his funeral that I was going to do something with my life to make a difference in our community, and that led me to the city council, and I'm happy to have been sworn in and blessed to have been sworn in 2013 of March on the anniversary of my childhood friend's death. So I just want to say rest in peace to him. Listen, I know you're going to hear from a lot of candidates tonight. I'm very happy about the record, and I know Anthony always talks about what has not happened in Queens, but I'm very happy about the record that I've been able to accomplish right here in our borough. First starting off, I was the Environmental Protection Chairman. Before Costa, I like to say I warmed the seat for him, but there were a lot of infrastructure issues in Queens. I was happy to secure $2.2 billion for Southeast Queens and the Rockaways, bringing home 55 projects that are going to ensure that our infrastructure is upgraded. We also closed recently and just finished up the design for a new precinct for Queens. We're bringing the first precinct, which will have a food pantry actually in a community center in Queens, a $94 million precinct, which is going to be known as the 116th precinct in Queens. When you talk about homelessness and the need to ensure that we're not housing people in hotels, I'm happy to have shepherded in 6,000 units of new affordable housing, mixed income housing in my community. When you talk about the need for jobs in Queens, I'm happy to just have let me not say stole, but took jobs from New Jersey, and we're bringing back what was formerly known as Elmhurst Dairy, now known as Bartlett Dairy, to Queens, 400 jobs, union jobs coming back to Springfield Gardens in Queens. And I know we've been dealing with this issue of anti-Semitism in our communities. I am the chairman of the Public Safety Committee that now oversees the NYPD, and I work with two of my colleagues, Mark Levine and Chaim Deutsch, to actually now just create the Office to Prevent Hate Crimes, because we want to ensure that every community in New York City feels safe. And if you don't feel safe, especially in this borough, we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that you feel safe. We sued the city over its unfair property tax burdens for Queens and the city as well. The only candidates that have done that on stage, if you live in a co-op and condo, I just passed the J51 tax abatement law, which is going to enable you to make repairs in your apartment, but also keep your rent affordable as well. And just in closing, I have not been a fair weather friend to the Jewish community. I've been to Israel. We are going to continue to stand with the community, and I am happy to be running for Queens Borough President and look forward to the dialogue tonight. Thank you.
room is pretty warm there, so I'll make it very quick. My name is Danniel Maio. I'm a map maker. Okay. I have a couple of maps over there on that table there that shows the detail of level of work that I do. And to make any detailed map, you gotta put.
Hold the mic right near your mouth.
Yeah. To make any detailed map, how's this? Better?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. To make any map very detailed, you need to collect a lot of information, and also you cannot be biased with the information if you're going to make a very good map. Also, at the end, okay, I sort of did this at the other forum. I'm giving those 2 maps I have away. So if anyone loves the maps, okay, come up to me afterwards. Ilya, maybe I'll give it to you since you mentioned it to me first, but anyone else, you certainly talk to me. It's very big. It's 6 feet tall by 4 feet wide. So if you don't have room for it, please don't come up to me. It's huge. Okay, very quickly. I'm an immigrant from Taiwan. Okay, I moved here when I was about 8 years old. I didn't speak a word of English at the time, and I went through my education in Maryland, American University, International Studies, Westinghouse, worked for law firm here in New York. Okay, very quickly, and been doing maps for 30 years. Okay, now the question of borough president, what am I going to do? One fact, I don't know anyone even know, whoever gets elected on March 24th is only going to hold that office for 9 months. Okay? There'll be another election, there'll be another election in June, okay, for primary, and then there'll be a general election on November 6th.
November 3rd.
On November 3rd, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, what I'm going to do in that I'm going to be dedicated at least minimum to that 9 months of gathering the information. I have been talking to a lot of people individually, not only from hearing their concerns. I'm sure a lot of you know a lot of problems and concerns you have reported to 311 or your councilman. Some of them have been sitting there for years. Okay, I'm going to systematize it. Okay, so at least you can see it on a map system of what's happening, what's being reported, who's doing what, what's happening, and that can be done. The technology is available today, and I can make that happen to you. More about that later, as well as some of the issues. If you have facts and correct information, you could really make policies that make sense for the community. And that's what I do as a map maker. Thank you.
Good evening. First, I want to thank Rabbi Sachs and the Israel Center for Conservative Judaism for hosting us tonight. Of course, Ms. Elaine Young and Jeff Gottlieb and all the various organizations that help bring a strong crowd out to participate in this forum. My name is Elizabeth Crowley, and I was born and raised in Queens. I was born to a big family, into a big family, the number 14 of 15 children. And yes, I have 11 sisters and 3 brothers. And growing up with 15 kids in one house is difficult enough. I really don't know any differently. But it was more difficult for my mom after my dad passed away when I was only 7. So I was really raised by a strong woman and 10 older sisters as well. And I watched by my mom's example that she was really community-minded and helped women in her work as a teacher and a director of early childhood programs. And it was my mom who showed me by example that when you help women, that you help families and you uplift communities. And she didn't think I was going to be a politician, and no one in my family was really directed to do that type of work. I followed my passions, and actually in college, I majored in art restoration. Yeah, funny enough. And then my first job out of college, I was working as a restorative painter on many of New York City's landmarks. My first job was on Radio City Music Hall. They had a massive renovation. Then I worked at the Central Synagogue on Lexington Avenue and 55th Street after they had a terrible fire. I worked at St. Patrick's Cathedral and many other historic landmarks, but it was while I was working as a restorative painter that I became active with my union. At the same time, I was a young mother going for my graduate's degree in architecture and urban planning, that it was my union that really made me open up my eyes to how there were so many people like me and so many families in Queens struggling and having an underrepresented voice in government. And in the district that I lived in, only Republicans had represented it. So when I was with the painters, it was really with their encouragement that I ran for office. And I was known to run against the political forces. And I challenged the traditional ones, and I won. First, challenging the Republicans in a district not too far from here, but in Western Queens, and making history the day I was elected as the first woman and the first Democrat. And then when I got to the council, I knew I was going to be there to stand up for the working person and stand against the status quo. And right away, I was fighting with the then mayor who wanted to close 20 firehouses. And we won. We kept those fire companies open. I took on fights with the speaker when she was being unfair to council districts and giving only some districts who told her, there'll be more time to talk, but if I could just close by saying, look, anti-Semitism is real, and there's no place for hate in our borough. I commit, it's my first act as a borough president, to put an anti-Semitism task force together with community leaders, faith leaders, to identify where this hate is coming from and to stop it. Do our best to stop it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Costa Constantinides, and I'm running to be your next Queensborough president. So I really believe we need to, did you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, I have a loud voice, I'm from Queens. But we are, we really need to transform and rethink what the borough president's office can be and what it can do. The three main jobs that it has are, number one, land use. As borough president, you have an opportunity to weigh in on every land use, every ULURP application in the borough of Queens. And I would want to make sure we have affordability and that there's union jobs attached to every one of those ULURP applications. Because union members, we should have workers who are able to afford to live in the neighborhoods in which they work. We should also make sure that we aren't giving away land, city property, to developers. Too often we give a developer a piece of city property and then we get back a piece of the pie. But it was our pie to begin with. There should be 100% affordability on city property. The second thing I would do as part of the borough presidency job is budget. They get between $40 and $70 million a year in New York City Capitol. That's $160 to $280 million over a 4-year term. So we need to work on the issues of climate change with the urgency that it deserves. So that means appointing a deputy borough president for sustainability and resiliency. That's solarizing and green roofing every city building in the borough of Queens. That's investing in our green space. And in doing those things, we're going to create jobs. My goal is to create 50,000 green jobs here in Queens. But also, how do we prepare that? How do we make sure our kids are ready? So it's investing in education. Queens is number one when it comes to something we don't want to be number one in. That's having trailers in our schoolyards. We have more trailers than any other borough. Kids learning, my little boy came home his first day of pre-K. He was, that first year of pre-K, and said, Daddy, I was a 4th grader today. Because the 25-year-old trailer froze out. And they had to slice up the class and put different students in different classrooms for a week. That's unacceptable. We need to make sure we get rid of trailers in our schoolyards. We need to make sure we're investing in STEM and coding and science. We have to make sure our kids are prepared for the 21st century. Having career technical education for renewable energy. Shop class for the 21st century. And also opening a harbor school here in Queens. Because boat captains, ferry boat captains, and divers, their average salary is $87,000 a year. We want to make sure our kids can get those jobs. But it's also about fighting to have an accessibility coordinator. Right? As a borough president, it's looking at these projects and saying, how are we doing that right? All right, so I'll have an opportunity to come back a little bit and talk about some of the other things. So thank you very much for having us here this evening.
Can you still hear me on this? Okay, it's, what, is it, it's not working? Yeah, it's working, okay. So, okay, before we go on to the questions, I realized that I forgot to mention that one of our elected officials is here today. Hopefully he's still here right now. And that's Councilmember Rory Lansman. All right, great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with our questions, and so just raise your hand, and Alan will be coming around to you after I call on you. What? Alan wants first question. He's
All 7 of you are friends of mine. I have one easy question for all of you. Who rode a bicycle here and who drove a car? Simple question. Raise your hand. Who rode here on a bicycle? Raise your hand. Who rode here in a car?
Everybody.
Okay, don't forget when you become borough president that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Right there first. Alan, thank you.
First of all, thank you for having this wonderful debate. My name is Bob Friedrich. I'm president of Glen Oaks Village. We're the largest co-op in New York. We have 10,000 residents. Obviously, safety in our community is our #1 concern. Most of you were fervent supporters of the catch and release bail ending law that took effect on January 1st, even though it was opposed by most prosecutors. Even worse, you all knew fully well it would result in both violent and non-violent offenders being released immediately after arrest when they engage in such serious offenses as burglary, robbery, stalking with a deadly weapon, vehicular homicide, arson, endangering the welfare of a child, and even causing the death of a person in a reckless manner. It is quite disturbing that most of you are more concerned with dangerous and recidivist offenders than law-abiding citizens. Please explain why.
Well, I'm happy to be the first one to take the easiest question of the night. I'm sure. So, look, I take exception to part of the framing of your question, that I am more concerned with a dangerous felon than with everyday citizens. You don't know me well enough to even say that, Bob, and you don't know who I care about and who I don't. My mother's going to be 80 years old on Sunday, and I care a great deal about her safety, and I care a great deal about the safety of every single person in this room.
Good question.
So, well, you took a long time to get to yours, so I'll answer your question. Let me just say, so let me just say, in answer to your question, while I didn't pass the law, it was a state law, I support the bail reform measures because I believe, and I believe it's important, even when we disagree, that I'm actually speaking the truth to you, even in a room where I know that most of the people don't agree with what I'm saying. But I believe one of the single greatest injustices in this country is mass incarceration and the absolute racist, discriminatory policies against black and brown, predominantly men. It is absolutely the work of all of us, I believe, to make sure that we end that system and that we have a system that works equally for every single person. And the truth is there is still judicial discretion. Judges do still have some power with respect to who is and who is not remanded. But I absolutely believe that tying someone's income and how much money they have to the amount of freedom that they are able to experience in this world is fundamentally wrong and unjust. And I believe that we can both be an anti-racist society and a safe society. And I realize a lot of people in this room may disagree with it, but I am here not to pander or say what I think you want me to say, but to say what's truly in my heart. And that's my answer.
I have been opposed to these bail laws since they were passed. They were passed on April Fool's Day by the state legislature as part of the state budget. Most of the legislators who voted for it did not know what they were voting for. I've spoken to some of them. They are shocked when they found out what was in it. It prohibits a judge from setting bail on a defendant charged with burglary in the second degree, That's residential burglaries. It doesn't matter what his background is. It doesn't matter how many burglaries he's charged with. A judge cannot set bail, which means that the defendant must be released. It prohibits a judge from setting bail on any misdemeanor cases, except in extremely unusual circumstances. No matter how many misdemeanor charges a defendant has pending, a judge cannot set bail, which means he must release him when he's arrested without bail. The notion that this is designed to cure mass incarceration is a myth. New York City has the lowest incarceration rate of any major city in the United States of America. The lowest. The notion that they were passed as part of a justice program, they were passed simply to reduce the size of Rikers Island so that they could build the jails in the local communities that don't want them. That is it. That is the reason for it. The notion that it's designed to solve racism in the criminal justice system is simply not true. I'll point out to you that in New York City, for every 100 people shot, 95 of them are black or Hispanic. 95%. 90% of the homicide victims in the city of New York are black or Hispanic. 70% of the robbery victims in New York are black or Hispanic. I'm running because I'm running against these bail laws, and I want to give the people an opportunity to vote against them. And it's your opportunity to do it, and let the legislature know that you're opposed to those laws and you want them changed. Judges have no discretion on burglary in the second degree, no discretion on robbery in the second degree, and no discretion on misdemeanor cases.
So as a retired New York City police sergeant and having worked the streets and when there's crimes going on, there is an absolute need that we need to have bail reform. We're talking about those extreme cases. The system is built that not one innocent person should be a victim in this process. That's what the system is built on. If one innocent person becomes part of the incarceration system and they had no charges pending simply because they couldn't afford bail, then that's the people that we're supposed to be working for. Believe it or not, that's what the system is built on, that concept. So there was discrimination when you have an unprecedented amount of people of color who are being incarcerated, and then you looked at the charges that were being charged, and you figured that, again, if you were a different Caucasian, you had a good lawyer, you were able to get out of jail. The system doesn't work if that's the process. So they're responding to a system that was broken. The response that you're getting now is the system that showed that there was discrimination in the process. If the process gets fixed and it becomes fair, again, they don't end up in jail by the officers, right? They don't end up in jail that way. They end up in jail because they end up going to court, and the court system itself could not process cases fast enough to bring those cases to trial. That's where the failure is. District Attorney's Office and the judges there had the ability to prosecute these cases and should have had timely trials and timely hearings. That's what we're fighting against. When that part of the system fails and the people end up still incarcerated simply because they haven't had their day in court, then the system is broken. So when we asked for bail reform, that's what they were looking for. And now you have politics being played in this again. It's not a city council decision, the bail reform. This is a state issue that was made. The city council, however, can have a voice to advocate the position of the people if we're upset about it. But it's your vote for your state representatives that has the power, right? And your city councilman, your borough president can be your advocate and advocate the choices that you want to make. We always talk about the extreme cases, the one innocent child that ended up there and getting hurt. But we failed to talk about the gentleman that got released and was a recidivist and ended up killing somebody in the process. So we talk about all the extreme cases, but we need to be talking about what happens right here in the middle, where it impacts everybody's daily life. Those people jumping turnstiles, they don't need to go to jail for that. That's a fine or something else, but we don't need to be putting them in jail for those type of crimes, okay? Again, thank you very much.
And let me start off by saying that those who commit hate crimes must be held accountable. And I just want to start that way. And I just also want to say that, you know, there's been a lot of conversations around the closure of Rikers Island and a new jail, but I just want to remind people, in my community, when we fought against the federal prison coming into our neighborhood for 5 years, we had no help from anyone around the borough. And I just got to put that out there because when it was put in Southeast Queens in my district in 2008 and we marched around it for nearly 5 years, no one came to our assistance. And I just want to remind people that that prison still exists and it's in my backyard. The other thing I want to say is when it comes to bail, let's be clear that there are two justice systems. Tonight, that predator, Harvey Weinstein, is home because he has the money to afford bail. However, you had Khalif Browder, an 17-year-old, 18-year-old young black man who was accused of stealing a book bag, who did not steal the book bag, who was languishing on Rikers Island, and who killed himself because of the trauma that he incurred in Rikers Island, and that is injustice, and we have to do something about that. I just want to remind you also, Bob, that those laws were made at the state, so do not accuse any of, there's one that you got to be fair, because we had no say-so in those laws. And matter of fact, even if we wanted to have a say-so, the state would not give us a say-so in that. So I just want to clear that up. The other thing is, how do we address the systematic issues, Mr. Quinn, that you spoke of? Because there is institutional racism that has led to crime breeding in a lot of different neighborhoods. And I'm happy to just have shepherded in about $37 million for a program called Cure Violence. And that's where we hire violence interrupters, people who might have gone to Rikers Island, to go and engage and work with young people in these communities, to get them out of the game, to let them, to connect them to job opportunities. That's the solution to the crime issue. Rikers Island has done nothing to rehabilitate a lot of these young people who went through it. Jail is supposed to be about rehabilitation. Let me remind you of that. Jail is supposed to be about rehabilitation. The problem that we've had is that there was nothing on Rikers Island. There was never any programs, no connection to job assistance, no connection to housing when you left, and that's why we had this recidivism happening on Rikers Island. So we can debate the merits of bail, but the bottom line is that if you have money today, you can leave Rikers Island. You don't have to enter Rikers Island, but if you can't pay $200, you'll be stuck on Rikers Island, and that's unfair. Thank you.
Facts and information are important. How? I haven't said much. I haven't said anything yet. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a map maker. So collecting facts, collecting information is critical. How many of you have a smartphone? Okay. For those of you who have a smartphone, do you have a citizen app? Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Your citizen app will notify you whenever a crime occurred, accidents occurred. Imagine. Someone's been released. Who's been hired for bench warrant? Where is it happening? What is the crime? What's going on? I'm going to help you put that on a map. Thank you. Okay. So you know what's going on in your neighborhood immediately.
Queens is a safe community for the most part, unless you're a victim of a crime. New York City is one of the safest big cities in the country. This did not happen by accident. When I was a council member, I was a strong supporter of hiring more police officers, advocated for 1,000 additional police officers, which we were able to put in the budget during the time that I was there. Now, the question is about bail reform, and all of the candidates here who participated in the forum in Douglaston answered that question. And at that time, I was the only one who said that I did not support no cash bail in the form that it is today in the bill, in the law that was passed by the state legislature. I believe it's flawed, certainly as it relates to hate crimes. We saw a situation in Brooklyn where a woman was arrested, and it wasn't until the third time she was arrested, and she was violently attacking, and I believe the situation was an anti-Semitic, it certainly was a hate crime, and she should not have been let out. And the judge needs the discretion when somebody is a danger to society, that they are able to be taken out of society. So it's not by accident that we have made Queens a safe community, and without our communities being safe, you don't have a place where people want to live, do business, raise a family. So there's nothing more important than public safety, and that's nothing new that I believe in. I've always felt that way. I think we need to reduce the amount of kids that are getting in trouble because there's still too many, and we have to focus on improving our schools, providing after-school programming, and while we're doing more, we're still not doing enough. And so as the next borough president, given the opportunity, that's something I would focus on, making our community stronger, but providing the access to the kids to have after-school programs, meaningful arts and sports programs, not only during the school year, but in the summer as well, to keep them out of trouble and on the right path.
You're talking about bail reform, right? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about safety reform, we're talking about bail reform. Bail is an opportunity to pay for your freedom, right? So if you're able to pay that bail, you get to go home. If you are unable to pay that bail, you don't get to go home. That's what we're talking about today. That's the system in which we are speaking about. It's about money. It's not about safety. It's about whether or not you're able to fork over the money in order to be able to go home. So that's what needed to be reformed. That's what we had to look at. You shouldn't be about how much money you have in your pocket. Shouldn't determine whether or not you're able to go free. The men and women on Rikers Island are there because they have been accused of a crime, but not convicted of a crime.
It's about guaranteeing your right to show up.
Well,
it's not about.
It is absolutely about money. But let's talk about safety. Like, how do we move forward here in the borough of Queens? Like, let's talk about, we are a safe borough. New York City is the largest big city, but we're also the safest big city. How do we continue to keep ourselves safe? I talked today, went to the Queens Eagle, you saw my op-ed on universal after-school programs. Because too many of our kids, our parents, can't afford to pay hundreds of dollars a month for after-school programs. So instead, our kids are either latchkey or they're out on the streets. We need to make sure we have shop class for the 21st century. Not every kid's going to go to college. But what do we do to make sure they're prepared for those jobs of the 21st century and making sure they're able to get those jobs? Those are the things we have to be focused on in our communities. That's how we make ourselves safer. That's how we build a stronger borough. Thank you.
We'll take, raise your hands for your next question, and that gentleman that your hand up.
So, just as a follow-up on the bail reform, is there any real thought to maybe this idea? I don't know. So I just want to get everyone's take on how exactly does absolving people from living with real-world consequences to their actions basically teach them how to prepare themselves for the 21st century? How does that make things better? What you just said was, let's make sure nobody has a consequence to what they just did. Maybe Rikers Island, whatever the situation there is, can be an actual consequence that people could take into account before they take action, good or bad. If they don't have a consequence, and that's what you just said, let's absolve people of the consequence. If they have money in their pocket, they can go home. If they don't, they can't. Hey, why not let that stand as a way that people can make decisions? Why do we want to infantilize people and take them away from the consequences of their own actions?
Let me try to clarify something.
Alan comes over to you with the microphone, okay? Alan, stand up so you can see. I'm sorry, I didn't think it was really a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Let him answer the question.
Let me just clarify something about the people who are on Rikers Island. They have an average of 15 prior arrests, 7 prior felony arrests, 8 prior misdemeanor arrests. They have an average of 8 misdemeanor convictions, 1 prior felony conviction. They have failed to appear in court an average of 3 times. 40% of the people on Rikers Island have been through alternative sentencing programs already, or they've been offered alternative sentencing programs and refused them. To say that there are no facilities or no programs on Rikers Island is not quite true. A lot of the people on Rikers Island who have mental issues receive treatment on Rikers Island. They are monitored when they get their, in order to take their medication. There are drug treatment programs, detoxification programs, and other programs on Rikers Island for people who are there. The whole notion of Rikers Island, you know, there are 6,000 people on Rikers Island. We're a county of 2.5 million people. That means almost 2.5 million people are not on Rikers Island. The ones who are there are the bad ones, the ones who pose a danger to people. If you wanted to make it fair, allow judges to remand defendants who pose a danger to the community or a risk of reoffending. No cash bail, just let a judge say, you're not getting out, you're remanded until trial. That way you do away with the income disparities, you do away with the rich versus poor, and that whole argument is out. Are we going down the line?
Whoever wants to answer, yes.
Again, just speaking to your issue, I know he has high ideals about what Rikers Island is capable of doing, and having represented correction officers and knowing what they go through there and what those programs are, I don't think they live up to what the printed expectations are and what the reality is. It's two different things on Rikers Island. And so when you talk about bail reform, you're right, it's about ensuring that they come back. But again, it's not about a person being able to afford justice. Anything that has that kind of criteria is not a deterrent. It just isn't. Because you have plenty of guilty people that can write a big check, they don't look like the same other people and they get released. So again, you saw a case in the newspaper, and I think got a lot of attention, the individual that punched a police officer and got out the next day, right? So if a judge was sitting there and found that that individual was mentally responsible, then he should have held him in jail, because that's felony assault. But what he didn't do is says if he felt that he was mentally incapable or had a condition of drugs or alcohol, then he should have mandated, let me finish, he should have mandated him for treatment. The judge in this political fight that we're having made a bad decision, and that got out in the public. And you have people on the extreme sides making cases that are not what the norm is. When we make adjustments to a system, we're making it because there has been a historical perspective of discrimination and abuse. And what they're trying to do is correct that problem. So you can't do that when the system's already broken and keep the same thing. And I said, these people end up on Rikers Island because they don't go to trial when they're supposed to. If they had a full trial when they were supposed to and been found guilty, then they would have been there justly or been sent to state prisons. They wouldn't have been at Rikers Island. So a balance has to be found, but we went to the end of the line. We went to the jail system to say that that was the problem and that's the only solution we're going to have. I disagree. I think the entire process had to be fixed, including the judge's responses, including the speedy trial, all the laws that would say people have to be brought to court and have their day in court. Those things have to be fixed, but nobody's looking at that end because too many politics is being played in this conversation. And again, I think the officers do a great job of keeping us safe, but there's no reason that we have to feel that we're not being safe in our communities. And just for clarity, any anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic acts, criminal acts, discriminatory acts, those people don't get bail. They wouldn't have been back out on the street. The only person ended up out in the street because it was misclassified when it was initially discovered. And it's absolutely true. It's not one of the charges.
Let me, because I'm one who likes to study data, and I chair the Public Safety Committee of the City Council, which oversees the New York City Police Department. And let me just start with saying, there are hundreds of people who've been released on supervised release as we speak. And when you look at the data, if you don't want to take my word for it, go to ComStat 2.0. You can look at it now, pull it up on your phone. Crime has not risen in New York City. Hell has not broke loose over the course of the last 15 days. There have been some attacks where people should have been held accountable. The other thing I will correct you on, Mr. Quinn, because I actually visited Rikers Island 2 summers ago, just to get an idea, to get a feel, especially during the debate over Rikers Island. And when you went, and this is the difference between being a prosecutor and being someone who goes in and actually speaks to a lot of detainees, because once again, you can walk out of here tonight and be accused of crashing your car into someone, and you could be locked up tonight, right? They could put you on Rikers, but the difference is you may have money to pay the bill. That's all we're talking about here. There are two systems. There are people who have the money to pay the bill, and there are people who do not have the money to pay the bill, and that's why people are on. But let me just remind you, everybody on Rikers is not guilty of a crime. They're being detained because they cannot afford bail. Last I checked, in the justice system, you are innocent until proven guilty, right? Is that something we all abide by? something? Okay, all right. Hold on, I'm not going to allow the call-outs, but but let me just go here. This debate, and I don't mind having more conversation around this, but this is not the job of the borough president. The job of the borough president is to ensure that 2.2 million people in this borough feel represented and that they're getting the resources so we can spin our heels on this subject. But if you have an issue with that, you should speak to your state legislators. They're the ones who have more of a say-so on this. The other thing I'll correct you on, Mr. Quinn, is that the programs are inefficient, and they're so inefficient on Rikers Island that I actually put legislation in to require them to actually survey every detainee there, because that's all you heard from the females to the males, that there was not enough. Sir, listen. I'm not going to allow calling out. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that tonight. We're here. We're adults. This is, So I just want to end with saying that there's a lot more that needs to be invested in a lot of these communities to ensure that young people are not going down there. There's no one in this room, and I'm not saying people have not experienced this, but I represent a community that was heavily where a lot of incarceration happened. Last year, we cut shootings by 80%, 90% over the last 2 years, and it has nothing to do with people going to jail. It has to be to do with the resources being put into communities. It has to do with ensuring those that are coming home have an opportunity to work. So if we're all committed and want to make sure that we have a safer Queens and safer city, we need to make sure that those investments are happening. I'm the chair of public safety. There's no one who works closer with the police commissioner than me in this room, who works closer to the inspectors than me in this room, and I can tell you that this borough has not seen extreme numbers of crime, even as bill reform has happened. Thank you. Sorry I took longer, but I chair the committee that oversees it.
Move on, question, topic.
The right thing.
I'll do it in 15 seconds.
15 seconds?
As a matter, I'm going to basically put the power in your hands. Whatever happens, okay, it's going to show up in your phone. It's going to tell you what's going on. You can do a search. Instead of looking at a report that overall, you see exactly what's around your block. Thank you. I can do that within my 9 months.
We're going to take another question.
I thought that was really, that was a question. That's why it's one.
Okay, so that woman in the back row, I had promised today, stand up and now for me. Yep.
This is actually a question to take up with Leroy and with
Come on, let's go to questions.
Okay, my name is Kim Lawrence. On a lighter note, I wanted to know what are the 2 immediate needs of the borough that you would like to change?
The question is, just wanted to know what the 2 immediate needs would be if you changed in the borough as the Queensborough president. So first, I think that we have a community board system that needs to be revamped, where we have everybody's voices heard at that process. I believe there has to be diversity and representation at each of those levels, and we have to be able to empower the community boards. Currently, you've seen a number of instances where the community boards have voted against projects, and they get approved and disregarded anyway. So again, when you empower people and you're the voice of the people, you then follow those directions that are being given to you. And when you're not satisfied or they're not satisfied with those answers, you just make sure that you get the information that's necessary. We have overdevelopment in Queens right now. We were talking about a process of freezing all luxury development right now until we had an opportunity to do a feasibility studies to find out what the infrastructure strain is going to be in Queens. You have all these projects being built and not being built for us. And again, you may have council members that say, not in my area, but you turn around, they sold away the rest of Queens, and these things are happening all over Queens. So as the Queensborough president, you get to see the entire view of not only the buildings that are being done, the school institutions, and the growth of Queens overall, and to ensure that there's a balance and that there's proper designation across the borough of Queens is extremely important, because too many people, when you hear the issues that are going on, they were never told about projects, they never had a voice in the decisions, and then decisions are being forced upon them. So as the Queensborough president, you empower the people, you empower their voices, and there's a number of structures in the Queensborough president's office that can do that job, and that's what I would do as soon as we get this Queensborough president. Thank you.
I would say the two biggest issues that challenge our borough right now are certainly housing and transportation, which is the big equalizer for everyone. I'll just start with zoning and affordable home ownership as well. There's been a real challenge. You know, if you're a young person trying to obtain home ownership, which actually helps you to build equity, there are really a lot of challenges around, and I'm happy to have gone actually to Washington, D.C. To lobby HUD with my colleague Danniel Miller for a program called the Foreclosure Buyback Program, which enabled us to actually look at foreclosed properties, but instead of giving those foreclosed properties back to the banks, the big speculators, we're able to turn them over to nonprofits to enable them to return those homes back to affordable home ownership opportunities. So I think as we look to the future, and I obviously shepherded in a bill also to look at community land trust, that's an area we really need to focus on. I also want to create a zoning task force. The borough is growing. We have 60,000 people, 1 in 10 kids in our school system in parts of Queens live in homeless shelters. So we need to really look at opportunities to make sure that we are building up Queens, but more importantly, making sure that real affordability is part of the conversation. I'll end with transportation because I believe the MTA's new plan is really flawed on buses, and we get around a lot by bus and train in our borough, and we have to really make sure that the next borough president is going to fight against the MTA's plan, because all they're doing is cutting service in lieu of saying that they're speeding up service, but they're cutting services to our borough. So we need to make sure that there's much more bus transportation. We need to make sure that the LIRR, something we worked on called the Atlantic ticket, which reduces the LIRR by nearly $5 to get into Penn Station, is something that actually is expanded to Penn Station, not just Atlantic Station. And then lastly, like I said, more investment in our bus. Congestion pricing passed the state, Bob, and we need to make sure that that money, we get a big chunk of that money for the borough of Queens. I would say those are the two things we need to focus on.
What are you going to do about that?
Please, no calling it a property.
What are you going to do about my property taxes? All you talk about is spending. How about my property taxes? I can't pay it. What are you going to do for my property taxes? Let's talk about that.
So I actually sued the mayor over property taxes, so if you do your homework, you'll see. Thank you.
Did you win or lose?
Obviously, I'm not going to get into the debate, but I'll look forward to
so
continuing
you're a
that
loser,
conversation.
right? You're admitting you're a loser. You're ineffective.
Okay.
And you want to be our borough president.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Property taxes are up 23%.
I'm a homeowner.
23%.
I'll give the 15.
What are you doing about it? What are you going to do when you're borough president?
Leave.
You're not going to do anything. You're just going to give us the collapse. That's all. The BS.
Where's the police when you need them?
Well, he does have a valid point, but anyway, to answer that question.
But not like that, though. Not like that. You shouldn't address it. We're adults. You shouldn't address it like that. Not like that, though. The way to talk.
Safety of our community, education of our children. Thank you.
Two top issues that I see facing Queens right now is first, transportation, second, education. I'll try to spend as much time on both. Can you not hear me? No. Okay. Transit, moving around the borough and out of the borough, but with public transit, as well as education. So I'll start with transit. I too disagree with the MTA's proposal to reduce bus service here in Queens. It's completely unacceptable. And I have a plan that would make buses free. The average person taking a bus makes about $30,000 a year, and the city subsidizes our buses by greater than 70%. So we're pretty much paying for buses already. If we were implementing free or no-cost, low-cost buses, then more and more people would take them, and we'd have fewer people driving. And so I think also it is important, and I see Alan Sherman here, how can it be 1 minute? Is it only 1 minute for the answer? 2 minutes. Okay, so I want to make sure it's Alan says we have 2 of the 3 major airports in the metropolitan area. We should take our airports and go. What do we get out of the airports? Absolutely nothing. For every plane that takes off or, lands or departs from one of our major airports, there should be something in it for us to help pay for our businesses or some improvement because there's a burden we've been shouldering. I have only 30 seconds to go, so in addition to that, I have a real plan to use our railroads to serve Queens residents. They shouldn't just be serving the Long Island Railroad. When I became a council member, I had the most overcrowded school district in the city. It is no longer overcrowded. We built out over 6,000 classroom seats. We have 5 of the most overcrowded school districts remaining of the 7 districts here in Queens. We need to build more schools. We need to help our failing schools do better. And there's really nothing more important to a parent than me. I have, my son Dennis is in the back, but graduated from a public high school, spent his vast majority of education, as well as my other son, in our public schools. So transit and public education.
I'm also going to echo on transportation. The MTA has been doing the Borough of Queens no favors. And let's talk about why. Nassau County, Suffolk County, and Westchester County all have a vote on the MTA board. Putnam County, that has 98,602 people, that's half of my council district. Half of my council has a fourth of the vote on the MTA board. As borough president, I would have 0. So I put forth a proposal last week that I've been speaking to some of our state reps on, and we've seen some interest, of actually adding an appointment to the MTA board for each borough president. Because honestly, there should be someone whose job it is to say, what are you doing to improve the lives of Queens residents? And they should be on the MTA board. Secondly, as borough president, I want to make sure we have a transit plan, that we're working with communities to come up with what we need. Because we know the MTA is not doing that. We know a computer in Manhattan is making our decisions for our bus routes. That's wrong. We need to have a plan for ourselves that we can then hold the MTA, the Department of Transportation, and our legislators accountable to. And then lastly, I talked about education before, but I'll go back to it. We have too many trailers in our schoolyards. We have not enough science, STEM, and technology in our classrooms, our 21st century learning. As council member, I provided funding every year to every school for new technology. Because I knew that the minute I bought this phone, it was obsolete. Right? They were making the Note 10 before I walked out with the Note 9. And that's the problem, is that we have to make sure that our kids are getting the technology to compete in the 21st century. We have to make sure there's science in our classrooms, STEM and coding, that they can get those jobs in the 21st century. And for the kids who aren't going to go to college, we provide them real skills through career technical education, so they can get the jobs of the future. So we're not leaving our kids behind before they even have a chance to have that opportunity. Did I hit this?
That's the buzzer.
Oh, that's the buzzer. There you go. I get it. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
We're not done yet.
Thank you. Okay.
We got 2 more.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot how we're doing this. You're right. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
First of all, thank you for the change of topic.
Thank you.
Very welcome. But you know, I think it's actually related to the other topic. So first, I agree with a lot of what my colleagues have said, but for me, it's transportation and education. And I'll be even more specific about education, right? The way to actually prevent more people from being involved in the criminal justice system together is to have top-rate schools in every neighborhood, great libraries in every neighborhood, and an extension of the Education Day, right? And we want to make sure, as someone who's the chair of cultural affairs, that all children in Queens in every neighborhood have access to the arts and education, because we know that when children have arts education in school in particular, their school grades are much, much better. We also know there are benefits to mental health. When children are actually struggling, when they come from struggling families, when they have art programs, painting programs, and creative arts, and the performing arts in their schools, they actually perform better, and they have healthier outcomes. So if you want to actually prevent children from entering the criminal justice system to begin with, invest in schools, but also what's happening in those schools. Make sure that arts is a fundamental part of the education of every single child. And transportation, I agree with everyone. The MTA is a disaster, and a disaster for Queens in particular. And it's certainly a good idea for the Queens Borough President to have a seat on the board. But New York City should have control of the majority of the board of the MTA, because right now it is not responsive to the people of the city of New York. So if we had municipal control of the MTA, you would have a much more accountable MTA, because with the board members in Westchester and Putnam and Dutchess County, they are not responsive to the needs of the 8.5 million people who live in the city of New York and are the predominant users of mass transit. And also, because my mother is going to be 80 on Sunday, you cannot talk about the needs of Queens residents without talking about seniors. Senior services, and in particular, making sure that mental health services and Alzheimer's and dementia are something that affected so many families in this borough, mine included. Absolutely essential that we have those kind of centers that are available regionally for every single family that is struggling with Alzheimer's. It is one of the most difficult things. If any of you have ever had to struggle with it, we are in ours. You've got to make sure that we're doing more for people who are suffering with Alzheimer's and dementia.
I guess the two biggest issues, and I'm going to name one of them for me, which is Rikers Island. But the reason my opposition for Rikers Island is that they're going to spend $10 billion to build those 4 jails around the city of New York. That's $10 billion that could be spent much better in the city of New York than to build 4 jails. For instance, NYCHA, to repair 1/3 of all the housing apartments in NYCHA housing, 1/3 of them, that's 50,000 apartments, would cost the same as it's going to cost to build 3,300 jail cells in the boroughs around Queens County, the boroughs in New York City. It's going to cost $3 million per cell to build those Rikers cells. $3 million a cell. And the city is letting people live in apartments that are lead infested, mold infested, the elevators don't work. Where are our priorities? Now I know this borough president, you don't rule everything, you don't enact laws, you don't make laws, but you can be a bully pulpit for the people of Queens. And for me, that's a very large bully pulpit. And I will be that bully pulpit for you. And I will be the bully pulpit that makes sure that we're spending money wisely. Education, there's a lot of talk about spending more money for education. Where are they going to get it from? I mean, where are our priorities? I believe that we should have more charter schools in Queens County. I think people in this city should have a choice of where they want to send their kids to school. I don't see anything wrong with that. So for me, the two big things that I would change, I would stop the building of Rikers, I would improve education by expanding opportunities and choice for the people of this county.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question, right over there.
My name is Cheryl Fettig, and many of you know me. Thank you very much.
Hold it closer to her.
I'm going to raise an issue that has, my name is Cheryl Fettig. I live in the neighboring community in Rego Park, a lifelong Queens resident, and many of you know me on the stage. I'm going to raise something which has been in the news, and some of you have already slightly addressed this. We must lead and stand up and show that anti-Semitism and other hate is unacceptable. It's unacceptable in crime, it's unacceptable in general. The Queens Borough President's Office, in the way that it functions, can lead and take on this task of bringing the different parts of our community together. We need to educate, obviously, adults and children, take the hate crime seriously, deal with the district attorney's office and the new laws that have been enacted. It's a multi-pronged approach that must be used, and I believe that we can't necessarily solve all of this, but we can solve most of it, because this is New York City. We should be able, and most of us do get along in New York City. So please address that. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know what the question was, but I'll certainly go there. So once again, I spoke earlier as being the public safety chair, happy to just have shepherded in the Office to Prevent Hate Crimes, and it took the mayor a little too long to ramp up, so we pushed him very hard between myself and my colleague, Councilmember Chaim Deutsch. That office is going to play a central role in ensuring that we address hate crimes. The other thing we're looking to do, and we put about $1 million in the budget, is to ensure that we have rapid response teams. So when these incidents happen, the community must take ownership. And I don't mean just the Jewish community or the Muslim community or the black community, because believe it or not, hate crimes have risen for everyone across the country and in New York City. And when we looked at those numbers, none more drastically than the Jewish community. But certainly we've seen an uptick in hate crimes everywhere and in every category in the city. So that office is going to play a very central role. We want to make sure that they have a bureau that's located right in our borough. But once again, the answer here is not necessarily just law enforcement. The answer lies in our communities. I represent Far Rockaway, very proud of it. Our communities have worked together collectively for many years. Matter of fact, so much that my former assembly member, Phil Goldfeder, and I would work, and we would do baseball games collectively between the African American community and the Jewish community. This is before we were seeing this uptick. So we need to do a lot more bridge building in our communities, and you're totally correct. The Borough President's Office gives you that opportunity to use your voice to bring people together. And Melinda actually did do a good job of it, but we have to ramp that up more than anything now with what we're seeing. The other thing I'll say, just in closing, is once again, we have to make sure that we stand together against hate crimes. It is so important that every corner of this borough, no matter where you're from, that we visibly stand together during those moments when we see hate invading like a cancer in our communities. Once again, we can talk about jail and locking people up. The answer is making sure that the next generation also is working collectively. In Far Rockaway, we just did a meeting between our rabbis and our clergy members in closing. We're going to be taking our young people collectively, together, communities together, to the Holocaust Museum, and also to the African American Museum in DC as well. And together, and that's the way we get to the stem of making sure that ignorance is stamped out in our neighborhoods. Thank you so much.
Sheriff Furtick's question is the Queensborough President's Office should at least be much more active. Sheriff Furtick's question is the Queensborough President's Office should take a much more active role in bringing the community, not just against the crime itself, ways to try to prevent it so we could reduce it instead of hit on it whenever it happens. I will take that leadership role.
I want to thank Cheryl for bringing up something that's terribly wrong happening in our city and across the country. But wouldn't think it should be happening here, of all places. Queens, what makes us so great? A big part of that is our borough's diversity. And a lot of that has to do with our borough's various different Jewish communities. So the unfortunate truth of the matter is hate crimes, specifically anti-Semitic hate crimes, have risen drastically. We saw last year that there's been an increase of over 60%. We need to take action. What is currently happening in the Borough President's Office is not enough. I've pledged as my first action as a borough president would be to put this task force together that would have religious leaders, not only Jewish religious leaders, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, every faith hurts when our Jewish community is attacked. We learn from each other, put community leaders on that board, figure out what works, how we could work together to stem this violence, to build tolerance. When I was a council member, I was able to get grants for our young kids, and mostly non-Jewish kids at Grover Cleveland High School, so that they could go to the Holocaust Museum as an after-school cultural program to learn how hate could turn into murder and genocide. Our kids don't learn about that in schools. It's terribly wrong that this is not happening today, and as a borough president, you could change that. You could do more. And it's important to educate the non-Jewish communities about anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and to do whatever we can to stop the violence from taking place and happening. You have my commitment.
Hey, Cheryl, thank you for the question. It's always good to see you. So the Borough President's Office can play a real role. There's a staff budget. There's about 60 to 70 people who actually work for the Queens Borough President. And they're all on Queens Boulevard. Now, in Manhattan, the Borough President there recognizes that communities shouldn't have to come to one Center Street to get the services that they need. That they have satellite offices in northern Manhattan in order to reach out to the communities, in order to be better connected to those communities. So as Borough President, I want to make sure we create an Office of Diversity and Outreach and have them in the community. Thank you for that. Use those staff in a different way to do the reach outs, especially around anti-Semitism and hate. Making sure that we appoint a Jewish liaison and we have someone of those 60 to 70 employees, right, that can be working on these issues all the time, bringing people together, bringing communities together, whether it's in our libraries, in our public housing, in our neighborhoods like this, in our synagogues. It's having community meetings, it's bringing one another together, and using the Borough President's Office, using the office of basically being your county executive to fight hate and to stand up against hate, and to use it in a larger way than it is now. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the question, and obviously this is an incredibly important topic. First thing I want to say is something that everyone in this room knows, which is that hatred, all hatred, is learned, right? It is a learned thing, because all these children are born not hating people because they are Jewish, but they learn it from someone else in their life. And I just want to tell a brief story. When I grew up in a working class neighborhood in Astoria by Steinway Street in the late 70s, early 80s, we did not have a particularly large Jewish community. But my best friend growing up was a guy by the name of Albert Bamoris. And the other kids in the neighborhood knew that he was different. And they knew that I was different, but for a very different reason. And they would bully both of us. They would call me gay boy, and they would call Albert Jew boy. And the two of us became really close because we knew that we had to stick together in order to survive. No child should ever have to endure that kind of hatred and that kind of bullying. And one of the things that I think we really need to do, and the Borough President needs to do, is make sure that there's more cross-cultural programming, and the Borough President can play a role in making sure that children from every neighborhood are going to other neighborhoods and experiencing cultural programming that brings people together. Right? A common language is music, a common language is art, a common language is dance. And through all of those experiences, we can actually build bridges between communities and between young people in particular before they adopt those behaviors of other adults or other older children that they see in their neighborhoods. So the Borough President has a Queens General Assembly, right, which is meant to accentuate our diversity, but we've got to actually build that office up and make sure that we are doing everything we can to stamp out anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred, and we've got to forcefully respond as a community every single time. I certainly know that when we march, as we did in Forest Hills, on Queens Boulevard and McDonald Park on Sunday, we definitely say with one united voice that hatred of Jewish people is unacceptable in any neighborhood, in any street, in Queens, every single time. Thank you very much.
Just a point of order. Under the new bail laws, hate crimes are not a bailable offense. In other words, if somebody slaps you, and injures you and gets arrested, they slap you because you're Jewish, or Hindu, or Muslim, or white, or black, and they get arrested for it, a judge cannot set bail on them. They get out, they go and they hit somebody else because they're Jewish, or white, or black, or Muslim. They get arrested, they go before a judge cannot set bail on them. They could do that day after day after day after day. Now I know, we're supposed to not just think of this as a lock them up thing, and it's not. But the people who are committing these crimes, some of them do it multiple times. Some of them get caught and go out again and do the same thing all over again. Menacing, stalking, assault in the third degree, those are not bailable offenses, meaning a judge can't set bail on them, no matter how many times they do it. That's a fact. Now, all the talk about education and outreach and all those things, that's fine. And that has a place in our educational system. It has a place in the Borough President's office. But there has to be consequences for people who go out and commit the crimes. Most people don't. Most people in this county are very tolerant of other races and religions. It's the small minority of people who commit the crimes who must be punished for doing it to prevent other people from doing it.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the question is, how can we deal with preventing or defending against anti-Semitism and hate crimes? And so if one part of our community is suffering, then all of our communities need to rise up. If one part is hurting, then all the communities are hurting. Anti-Semitic acts and hate crimes are illegal, and they need to be addressed accordingly, right? But also we got to understand that there should be no tolerance for that at all. Queensborough Presidents has the office to, again, be the bully pulpit. They're not the lawmakers in that respect, but if there's somebody being released because they committed a hate crime, then you can obviously have a voice at that table, and you can actually organize the community to say this is not acceptable. But that's an organization, that's the leadership of what you have at the Queensborough President's office. So you can lead that fight. You can do the educational programs, provide the insight. I hold clergy task forces, meetings every Saturday morning, about 8:30 in the morning, and I meet with various religious leaders from all the faiths. And we sit at a diverse table to have common conversation about what the needs are of the congregation and the community. So it's something I do, and I'm not in public office. It's something that we do as part of the work that I've been doing for the last 30 years. So we sit at those meetings on Saturday mornings. Just this Saturday, we had clearly a great group of clergy representatives present. It is about that unification. It's somebody who can bring everybody and has done the work before to bring everybody to the table and ensure that the voices are being heard. That is the process. But again, if your borough president is quiet, then we become victims all over again. The police department has the proper response. We don't need additional response teams. What we need is that kind of support from all of our elected officials to stand out there and make sure that we're holding people accountable. And that's the police department that's doing a very effective job of doing it. We just can't have them misclassify incidents when they are clearly racially biased incidents and then classify them as simple assaults. Then that would be a different category. But when you classify with a biased crime, that is not a simple assault, it's not a slap in the face, it's an entirely different category of charges, and there are laws for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me see. Which part of room have I not been to? Alan, I'd like to ask a question. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I put my hand up. I'll make it quick. No, but then I can't see it. Okay. Thank everyone for coming. My question is based on what everyone has been talking about, hate, crime, politicians. It sounds to me as politics as usual. And I'd like to ask, what is going to be your open door policy as borough president? And I'd like to tell you why I'm asking this question. I've applied twice to be on Community Board 7. And once it was rejected for no reason. I wasn't even asked to come for an interview. The second time, the borough president's staff told me that they did not receive my application even though our council member mailed it in directly to the office. So I'm a woman of color. I live in North Queens, where it's primarily white. But I'd like to know, what is the recourse of the borough president's office, since community boards are so important to
every community in the borough of Queens. Thank you.
As you know, the Queensborough presidents have authority over half of all the community board appointments. Okay, so certainly coming to the Queensborough president's office, you should have a greater opportunity if you're selected. And definitely, if I'm in there, please, my door is open. Everyone who wants to become a member of the board, there'll be an open process. I'm committed to that.
Our community boards should represent the communities that they represent, should be reflective of the communities, which should mean that since women are about 52% of the population, we should look to have about at least 50%. But when you look at most of our community boards, we have an overwhelming majority of men serving. But, you know, this is not unusual. We have an overwhelming amount of men that run for office too. If women ran as frequently as men did, women would win too. So I've implemented a program called 21 and 21 that helps women run for office, because when I got to the council, there were committees that women weren't even on, and we were going backwards. So while it may be slightly different than community boards, it pertains to women being involved and helping to make decisions. And that should be happening on our local community boards. We also need young people. We don't have enough people coming out of high school or in college or coming out of college serving on community boards as well. I started a program in my district that participatory budgeting, where kids in schools decided what to vote on with their parents. I was able to allot funds to every single school in a fair way, an equal amount. You know, I often talk about fairness and how Queens doesn't get its fair share of the budget, but as a council member, I always tried to make sure every community had its fair share of the budget, and the community had a say in how to spend that. And that's why boards are so important. So it is important to not only have gender diversity, but also ethnic diversity as well. And we are the most diverse borough, and our community boards should reflect that diversity. Thank you.
Good to see you. So I think you had a question about open door policy and also the community boards. As a council member, I answer my own emails. Please don't send me all emails all at once, but I check my own emails every day, and I respond to constituents because I feel it's important that I know what's going on, and I'm able to answer your concerns first before a member of my team does that reach out. And I think that's something I want to make sure as borough president. Again, 2.3 million residents, might take me a little while to answer you. You may not always like the answer I'm going to give back, but I'm always going to give you an answer. And then secondly, as our community boards, we have a broken process. My Department of Outreach and Diversity would be out there recruiting our community board members, making sure we're getting a diverse group of men and women to apply for the job. And then having an open and transparent process to make sure everyone knows who's getting appointed and how. That we can ensure that it's not because I know you and you know me, and I like you and you like me, and therefore you're on the community board. But there's standards that there will be set for appointments to the community board. I think that's so important that it's open and transparent. You know, we're going to make sure that it works in a better system than it is now, and I think that's what we need. Thank you.
So first on the open door policy, it's incredibly important for the next borough president to be as accessible as any elected official in the borough. And I just want to tell you a quick story. I go to the gym in my neighborhood an awful lot, and people stop you all the time when you're on the treadmill. And they always say, I probably shouldn't do this. You're clearly working out. And I always take the music out of the ear, I stop it, and I say, no, this is my job, right? This is my job. I will get off the treadmill, and I will take the information that you are trying to share with me. Often it's about a constituent service, an issue they're having. That's the kind of borough president we need, right? Someone who is going to be accessible. And in terms of community board appointments, there's so many cases like yours where people don't get on and don't know why they didn't really get on. And I think that's why it's really important to have qualifications, to have a system that I would impose where every single person is guaranteed an interview, right? Every single person who wants to be on a community board should have the right to go into Borough Hall and state their case, state their qualifications, and talk about why they would be a great representative for their community. So many people want to serve, but they don't get the opportunity to serve, right? We've got to change that. We've got to make sure that if you want to serve, it's a volunteer opportunity. I was on community board 2 for 3 years before I got elected. Everyone should have a fair shot, should have an interview, should have that open and transparent process, and then understand why it happened or it didn't happen, not based on political patronage or relationships or agendas. That's what we need to do to make sure we have a fair, open, and transparent process.
I want to talk about open door policy or transparency. I was an executive assistant DA in the DA's office. I supervised 140 assistant DAs in 7 bureaus. My office was on the same floor as one of those bureaus. I wasn't up on the 3rd floor, which is where all the executives normally go. DAs would come into my office every day to ask questions, to complain about things, sometimes to, every once in a while, to say we were doing things right. But I was always there for them, openly and available to them at any time. Whenever we had to appoint people for various positions, we would hold interviews. We'd interview them, I would interview them face to face. And we would make the decision once we did all the interviews. I believe that the community planning boards will diversify naturally in Queens County. Neighborhoods change. People come into communities that weren't there before. The ethnic diversity in the communities change. And as those people are in the community, work in the community, become familiar with the community, they will start getting on the various community planning boards. I don't believe in picking people for any position because of their race or their religion. I think that's dangerous to start putting that in place. But the planning boards in Queens County, a lot more people apply for them than there are positions. So a lot of people are not going to get those jobs. And I don't believe that the former borough president instituted any kind of policy that would prevent people from various ethnic groups from getting on them. I believe that people should be on the community planning boards when because of their experience in the community, their work in the community, and the devotion to the community. And I will have an open and fair, transparent process for appointing.
Again, the first part of the question is the open door policy. Absolutely. Complete access 24/7 is how I've been able to give out the cause information. My phone rings directly anytime somebody calls that number. We make sure that we give direct responses. And again, consistent is open in Queensboro Hall that when people come in, they're going to be greeted and treated fairly and have complete access to the facility and the services that are available. When we speak about community boards, it's the same process. The borough president has the ability to appoint 5 positions, but they also approve the city council's request. So if they're not diverse, the borough president has the power to be able to send it back. In fact, if the borough president's office is the receiver of all the applications, they can even send back all the applications to the city council. Here's 15 more people that applied that you need to go through your process as they go through the same process with us. And we need to pass rules, because recently you heard things about community board members who were working for real estate interests and approving bills while they're serving, right? Or serving in those boards and having influence on other board members. And that's the same process, the same rules that we need to keep the integrity of the community board members. We need to have the same rules to get the integrity of our elected officials who are representing us. Because when you start taking real estate and special interest money, and then you're the person approving those contracts and approving those developments, then there's a conflict of interest where you're no longer representing the interests of the community, but you're representing the interests of those developers and the people who are financially supporting your campaigns. But we had a lot of conversation about people on community boards who were currently hired by development corporations and still serving on those boards. That's absolute conflict of interest. That's why we need the rules that you spoke about, for clarity about if you take a job like that, you shouldn't be serving. If you're in a position of approving contracts, you should not exercise your influence over other board members either. So there's an entire rule structure that needs to be put in place to preserve the integrity of the process and to ensure that the community's voice is the one that's being heard, not the voice of realtors or special interest individuals. Thank you.
Let's just start off. There are 700 community boards, 14 community boards in Queens. First thing, and this is why I supported actually term limits, I'm sorry if you're on the community board, because I thought it was important in terms of making sure that we get new voices included in the system. So I'm a firm supporter of that and tired of term limits. proud to have also been a big supporter of that in the charter regulations that you voted for just this last election to pass. Listen, we live in a day of technology. I mean, there's no reason you should not be able to apply online. And the office should certainly be giving a written response to each and every one, whether they are approved or disapproved. And that is just part of being an elected official. You should always respond to people when they write you at your office. So through that process, once again, making sure there's more transparency, making sure there's an opportunity for you to actually apply online. The other thing we can do, which I think is something we would have to strategically think about, is there should be some independent folks in the room as well. So there could be an opportunity to have a task force of some nature to really also be at the table. So as the borough president has these conversations and starts to look at applications, there's more than one set of eyes in the room. Just on the conflicts of interest thing, I think every community board member should obviously, just as we have to do, fill out conflicts of interest forms as well. We have to do them how many times as city council members? At least once a year. We're reporting out where we work at and making sure that we also recuse ourselves if we are certainly attached to any people who may be working in certain fields, and that there's transparency around that. So I think that that's something that could also resolve that as well. So that's what I would say, but sorry, you certainly deserve a written response, whether you were getting approved or disapproved, and that's something my office would do. Thank you.
All right, well, it's so great to see so many questions and so much interest, but it is 9 o'clock. People work here at the synagogue need to go home. We need to go home.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Economic development.
Shabbat shalom.
We're going to be asking for closing statements now from each of the candidates. 2 minutes, closing statement from where we left off.
She should have said the program's over. You have to get closing remarks.
They're doing an end statement, right?
Elaine has asked for a closing statement, so I want to thank Elaine and everybody who participated here tonight. We have just under 10 weeks, so those of you who haven't had a chance, I hope we could talk tonight. I'll stick around for a little bit longer, or along the course of over the next couple of weeks. But I mentioned earlier my upbringing. It was that big family that taught me to fight for what is right, for what I believe in, and to never back down. It also taught me at a very young age how important it is to fight for fair share. And as a council member, I fought for real reforms, and I was able to bring real reform to city government, to budgeting, and we need that borough-wide. We need Queens to have its fair share for our kids who get nearly $2,000 fewer per pupil for their education compared to our neighboring boroughs. We need it to move around the borough. In our borough, where we have half as many trains as Brooklyn and nearly the same amount of population, we need to increase transit, to have communities where we can build real affordable housing and job opportunities. And I'm different. I may be a woman, and before, I don't know if I clearly answered the question about community boards, but I'm certainly a good listener and accessible. And I plan to be the same way, given the opportunity to represent you. And I bring different leadership. I wouldn't be the same as what we have. I think Queens needs change. We need somebody we could all work together with, where it's not just my ideas, but our ideas. It's time for our borough, which has been a borough 50, 60 years ago when we hosted the first World Fair in 1939, over 80 years ago, known for its bold ideas and innovation. It should be that borough that still puts forth big ideas and works together for big changes. And in closing, because I've run out of time, I want to make sure everyone here is invited to join me at a breakfast. I'm hosting a breakfast, and I have flyers here at the Young Israel of Kew Gardens Hills.
Sunday, January 26th.
Right, where I hope we could talk more about how we could work together to build a strong task force to fight anti-Semitism, how we could strengthen our relationship with Israel, and how we could support our local Jewish community organizations. Thank you for tonight, and I look forward to talking more.
Elaine, I want to thank you and Jeff Gottlieb and Sherman and everyone for doing such great work this evening. Again, my name is Costa Constantinides. I'm running for your next Queensborough president. So I said earlier, we need to rethink and transform what we think the borough presidents can do. The main three jobs, we talked about how we need to have affordability in our communities. Rising rents and rising seas shouldn't be forcing people out of their homes. And today, families are going to bed feeling insecure about whether they can afford the rent or stay in the communities that they help build. It's about making sure that we're creating good affordable, making sure we have good labor jobs, good union jobs in our community. So our young people can have that opportunity to have that American dream like my father-in-law did when he came from Sicily in 1971. He became a Teamster, was able to support my wife and her family when he died with the pension. That's what we need to be able to create for our kids. We need to make sure as borough president on the budget, whether it's fighting climate change and investing and having solarizing and green roofing every city and building in the borough of Queens, whether it's investing in our green space or having a deputy borough president for sustainability, whether it's investing in our schools, getting rid of trailers, having universal after school, whether it's having STEM, coding, science in our schools and making sure they're able to thrive in the 21st century, whether it's being your county executive, to fight for you as your advocate, making sure that whether it's fighting the MTA, to have a member of the board, whether it's having a transit plan that we develop, not the MTA, that we're actually able to hold them accountable instead of them dropping down a plan and us having to respond to it. Or whether it's reaching out to our diverse communities by having an office of outreach and diversity, using the current staff of the borough presidency in a different way, we can make sure that we're in our neighborhoods, not just on Queens Boulevard, but in every community, whether it's our libraries, our synagogues, our public housing, making sure that I'm working for you all of the time. That's how we make sure we build a borough presidency that is stronger and one that's more responsive to everyone in Queens. Again, my name is Costa Constantinides. My website is votecosta.com because I didn't want you to have to spell my last name out. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
I just want to say thank you all for a very lively discussion tonight. This has been about our 12th forum, and I have to say this is a very spirited community here. I just want to say thank you. It is important for whoever's going to be the next borough president to understand that diversity takes many forms, including how we think about the world. So many people here may disagree with some of our ideas, but it is important for us to talk about those ideas, to talk about those differences, and to hear each other. So I pledge to be a hardworking borough president that represents every single block and every single neighborhood. Whether we agree or disagree on every issue, you deserve to feel represented, you deserve to feel respected, even if it's a borough president you didn't vote for, or you're not even in the same party as. So that's what I've done. I'm proud of my record in the city council. I want to be a borough president, and I want to be a borough president that makes sure that Queens is a place where every single person can live and thrive. So with that, thank you all for being here, and thanks so much for our great borough.
Thank you for sponsoring this. This is interesting. Maybe your 12th forum, it's my 3rd. I decided to run for borough president toward the end of my term in the DA's office. I actually decided finally about 2 weeks before I left the office, which was about December 15th or 16th of last year. I'm not a politician. I've never, as an assistant DA, you're not allowed to be engaged in politics. So for 42 years, I've been disengaged from actual political life. But this race is so important for me and for the people of this county. And I keep repeating it, but Rikers Island, they're going to build a 20-story building in Rikers in Kew Gardens, and they're going to fill it with people who are charged with serious crimes.
Yep.
And they're going to put them there, and in order to do that, they're going to release a whole slew of dangerous defendants out of Rikers Island. They've already started it in order to get those jails down to a small number. I decided to run because I want to make that an issue. I want to give people the opportunity to vote for me, to register their disapproval of spending $10 billion in taxpayers' money to build 3,300 jail cells, when they could spend that money on NYCHA housing, on transportation in this county. I got on the subway the other day going to the city with my wife. I'm standing there and waiting for the E-train to come into Kew Gardens. And I look up, and there's water falling on my head.
Oh my God.
And there's like stalactites or stalagmites, whatever they are, hanging down. The paint is peeling off the subway.
Oh my God.
And you sit there and you say, why do we have to live like this? Why do we have to have subways where people are so crowded and you know, they run late, they're dirty, they're filthy? Why do we have to live like that? But the priority of your legislators is the inmates on Rikers Island, when they could do it so much better and cheaper by rebuilding the jails on Rikers. They could build a world-class facility on Rikers Island. That's the reason I'm running for borough president, to give you a voice that you haven't had in this whole process. And I'm asking for your vote, and I hope that you'll vote for me on March 24th.
I want to start by providing you with my email, because it's info@mirandaforqueens@gmail.com. You can send it straight to me. It's mirandaforqueens@gmail.com. If there are questions that you had in this evening that you didn't get a direct answer to, please email me, text me. I will respond back to those questions, because I know you want to have answers. And when we give you those answers, please share it with your neighbors as well. It's important to share the information. So I want to say the following. When we're talking about Rikers Island, I said I went to a meeting earlier today where I tell you that they are already making plans of how they're going to develop Rikers Island. So that conversation, along with the city council bill that was passed that says you will never build another jail on Rikers Island, they have already decided what's going to be built there. There are developers already carving up Rikers Island. So the question now is, I sat there with the ADWs, which are the wardens and the employees of Rikers Island. They were concerned about whether they were going to have jobs in the morning or whether they were going to be preserved. What was the union input going to be on these projects? So the union is sitting at the table knowing that these decisions have already been made. We're behind the 8 ball on this. They've passed it. City Council passed a follow-up law that says that we won't be able to build on Rikers Island after this, another jail, and now you have the community jails. In fact, one of the jails that they're building is going to have like 8 to 10 floors of commercial space in the bottom of the jail. So think about the concepts that we're talking about right now. We are not a part of that conversation, and I believe every elected official had the responsibility to be a part of that conversation. They had the responsibility of making sure there was full disclosure of information. In their political positions, they have the power to do that. And there's a failure, a lack of paying attention. When these changes are being made, we weren't at the table and our voices were not being heard. Now some of these things are going to be done deals already, as they say. Well, we're going to have very little input to change them. However, if they want to do more development, if they're going to do more changes here in Queens, we need to have a strong voice at the table that is not compromised by any special interest. You see the changing of our neighbors. You see the luxury buildings that are being built in the middle communities. You understand that that's not affordable for us, right? It wasn't built for our communities. They're building these spaces, and you're going to have outside people come moving into our districts. Again, I live right here on 169th Street with my wife and 3 boys. I live in this community. I understand the problems that we face every day. Public safety is absolutely a priority for us. We need to feel safe when we're going home, when we're going to school, when we're taking public transportation. I'm a retired New York City police sergeant and the chief of ACS police. I'm not only learned it from somebody else, I experienced it, lived it, I know the rules and regulations, and I know how to work with all the agencies to make sure that we get the protections that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for coming out. I'm very proud to have been endorsed by former borough president Claire Schulman, and partly because of our record. And you know, anybody up here can tell you what you want to hear. We're going to stop Rikers Island, and if you're looking for what you want to hear, good luck. You need a borough president who understands more than just the conversation around Rikers Island. This office is such a critical office. $70 million budget, $5.5 million expense budget, and we need to make sure that every single corner in this borough feels represented. For a very long time, there have been voices in this borough who have not felt that they've gotten their fair share. The job of the borough president is to ensure that this is a Queens for everyone, a Queens that everyone feels represented. And we're ready to do that on day one. We brought jobs back to Queens. We brought a precinct to Queens. We brought $2 billion to Queens. We've done work around home ownership. We brought ferry service to Queens. We ensured that co-ops and condos will stay affordable for Queens. My record speaks for itself. If you're looking for someone who has tangible results for this borough, then I'm your candidate. If you're looking for a candidate who actually should be the DA, then he's your candidate. He should have ran for DA. But the bottom line is that this office is too important for us to take it for granted. The borough president's job is to be the cheerleader and defender of this borough. And on day one, we are ready because we've chaired 3 key committees, the only council member who's done that up here over the course of the last 6 years. And I'm ready day one. I'm battle tested. On day one, we are ready to get to work. And I look forward to your support. Thank you.
Okay, I'm the last one. We're going home after this. Yes.
Take the map.
Yes. Okay.
Map question.
Now, what I'm going to do is really give you the power. You decide. You have the information. As a map maker, I'm going to give you the data that's accessible at your fingertips. I can still do this within 9 months. That's not a problem. But now, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm giving you a free map at the table. Anybody would like to have the free map?
Yes, right here.
Okay, so just first one. Anyway, more about it coming down. So thank you very much for your patience, and I guess I'll pass it over to you, Elaine Young. Good night.